Less than a minute after the flight engineer reports fire in the cabin, the captain asks him to do another check. This time, he returns with a different assessment.
It's just smoke in the aft.
Okay, we're going back to Riyadh.
Okay, no problem. Everybody's panicking in the back, though. No problem. No problem. No problem at all.
Downplaying the severity of the situation can most certainly affect the captain's perception of what exactly is going on.
What happens on the ground?
Wow, it's hard to know. Play from the 500-foot alert.
500.
And 500? Hydraulic?
You've got low pressure on number 2. Looking good.
Tell them to not evacuate.
Place your hand behind your head, head between your knees.
No need for that. We're okay. No problems. No problem.
Minimums. 100.
100?
100.
50.
50.
40.
40.
30.
30.
The fire is so severe at this point that it burns through the CVR's electrical.
Just before touchdown, the fire destroys the wiring that powers the cockpit voice recorder. It's a setback for the investigation.
We have no idea of the chaotic nature of what was going on in the cockpit at that time.
He wasted 5 minutes deciding to turn around. He wouldn't declare an emergency even though he's been told there's a fire in the cabin. He failed to evacuate everybody on that plane.
And the other pilots did nothing to change his thinking.
What kind of emergency training did this crew have?
Let's pull their files and see.
Investigators examine the pilot records of Saudia 163's crew members to determine if they were properly trained to deal with a fire.
This does not look good. The first officer was dropped from pilot training, but reinstated 2 years later as a result of committee action. Committee action?
I have a different term for committee action. It's friends or family. He wanted to be a pilot. He was going to be a pilot, and someone helped him become a pilot.
It's nothing compared to the flight engineer. Listen to this. Failed to qualify as a captain and first officer. Was only hired by the airline as a flight engineer after paying for his own training.
The flight engineer was also another incompetent person. He flunked previous training, and he paid for it out of his pocket to become certified as a flight engineer.
Well, the captain's training history is no better.
The records show that the captain's qualifications were also questionable.
Slow to learn, needed more training than normally required, difficulty varying from a set pattern.
The captain's training record indicated that he was indecisive and slow, and that was all reflected in the events of this accident. All 3 of these guys were extremely weak. None of them should have been in the cockpit, and certainly not 3 of them together.
It was literally a crew pairing of an accident waiting to happen. If anything unusual was going to occur, these people were going to descend into some state of confusion, which is exactly what happened.
Because the cockpit voice recorder failed just before the TriStar landed, the investigation was unable to determine why the captain didn't order an evacuation. But they did point to his actions as contributing factors.
It is possible that the captain was in denial about the severity of the fire and the situation in the cabin. But if he had gone back to see for himself, then perhaps things would have been different.
The other thing to consider is that air crews realize that if they shut an airplane down on a runway, that effectively closes the airport. These are things that could put your job in jeopardy. So who really knows what his logic was? But what is certainly clear was this captain was definitely not in command of this emergency.
Even though investigators are unable to confirm that matches were the source of the fire, they do recommend improvements for all cargo compartments.
To make the cargo compartment safe, you had to put a fire extinguisher in there, detectors and extinguishers. And that's what we recommended they do.
They also recommend removing the Nomex liner.
The investigation went back to the manufacturer. They identified a way to improve the resistance of the compartment to replace the Nomex and return the compartment to a full idea of self-extinguishment.
The Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA, considers the recommendations. But it's not until 1998, almost 2 decades later, that the FAA changes the regulation. Now, all cargo compartments on commercial airliners must contain both fire detection and fire suppression systems. In the aftermath of the tragedy, Saudia asks Bob McIntosh to revamp its safety training and procedures.
I was hired to form a corporate safety department, and it was my pleasure to do that for my 6 years there.
There were numerous lessons that we learned from how cargo compartments are designed, and much better designed flame retardant materials are now used throughout the cabin. Our aviation system is safer because of this accident.
All those things are wonderful takeaways from a very, very tragic situation.